Well, first of all, Carl, I appreciate you doing this. It's an honor for me to be doing this, and I know those that will be listening will really enjoy our conversation. Some of these things you've shared with me before, but I'm looking forward to sharing that with the audience as well. So let's start with the basics. Tell me where you spent your career. Where were you at the beginning and throughout your career? Where have you served in your academic role?
Well, I began on a dairy farm in northern Wisconsin, and I learned a lot about hard work there. And that was my first education. And after graduating from high school, I went to University of Wisconsin at Madison, and I continued on for my master's after my bachelor's degree there, getting it in soils of all things. And then I took my first job. I still didn't know what I really wanted to do in life, and I knew it wasn't going to be in soils. Then I took my first job at Texas A&M University, a branch station in southwest Texas near the Mexican border. It was an irrigated area, and mainly winter vegetables and some citrus, but also winter pastures for growing beef calves and lambs. It was important, and that's what I was supposed to work on. And of course I knew virtually nothing, because what I learned at the University of Wisconsin in forages was not applicable there. Yeah. But I learned a lot, and that was important for me, and I loved what I did. It was just wonderful. So then I went on from there to get a PhD at the University of Florida, majoring then in agronomy and ecology with a strong minor in animal nutrition, getting a very good education there. And that fitted me nicely for my first big position at Auburn University in Alabama. And that is where I had 22 years of research and teaching, and loved it. It was wonderful. I knew I was in my career big time. And then after that, the University of Georgia called, and the University of Georgia offered me a very nice position here. So I moved over here and continued in rather similar work, of course, research and teaching, and had a wonderful career here for 26 years, and finally retired and continued to do a lot of writing after that.
Very prolific writer. You have set a high bar for a lot of us to try to match. But I would just like to emphasize that's a very long career. I mean, you started in Texas in 1952, right?
Correct.
And officially retired in 2003 from the University of Georgia. And
3 more years.
And then 3 more years of teaching afterwards as an emeritus, and have continued on. I jokingly tell everyone who asks about you these days that you're in the office much more than I am. So you really are very prolific over the years and have had a lot of influence.
They paid me to have fun.
Yeah, that's true. So you mentioned growing up on a dairy farm, and that's a challenging situation in and of itself. Teaches you a lot about hard work and the value of work. And how about your parents? How supportive of your education were they?
My mother was, both my parents wanted me to go to elementary school, a one-room school, 8 grades in one room, and they supported my high school education. And then my father said, that's enough for you to stay on the farm here and labor with me. And I really didn't think that was a good idea. And my mother said, absolutely no, he is going to the university. And she stood up, which was not easy for a woman back then to do. But she stood up against him and said, Carl's going to school. He gave me $100. That was the last money I ever saw from him. you could work, get your way through there. And so I had 3 part-time jobs there, and I scratched out a living, had to pay for my fees and so on. And it was hard, but I made it. And then I decided that when I saw all these veterans coming back from World War II, getting the GI Bill, I thought, that's what I want to do. So toward the end of the war, I enlisted in Marine Aviation, and then I got my GI Bill and put through bachelor's and master's degree.
Yeah, I'm sure that really helped a lot. Your mother's contribution to your education was
My
impressive.
mother was a remarkable lady. In fact, we were best friends always, and we exchanged letters weekly from the time I left home until she was 95 years old.
Wow.
Every week.
That's great.
She lived till she was almost 100.
Well, that's a good bar for you to shoot for. So, and while we're on the subject of your mother, I understand that English was not a language that she spoke much.
All 4 of my grandparents came from Norway and settled in a Norwegian settlement there in northern Wisconsin, and of dairy farmers. And I grew up, my parents of course spoke English, but didn't use it at home. And so my first language was Norwegian, which is a pretty useless language elsewhere in the world, only 5 million people speak it. And, but anyway, I learned just passable English before I went to grade school. But it didn't take me long to acquire fluency in English. So it's, yeah, I'm bilingual. Later I learned quite a bit of German and Spanish. And I picked up my Spanish on the border working there.
Oh, yeah.
I had to. And so it gave me a lot of opportunities.
Very good. So you mentioned your degree programs and wide assortment, working on soils and minor in animal nutrition. And so how did you end up working on forage crops?
Well, it was my interlude there in Southwest Texas that convinced me this is what I want to do in life. It was intriguing. And so from then on, I was hooked. Pure and simple. And that's what I've devoted my work to over the years. And I was very blessed to work with some wonderful people, both in research and in extension. And I can't say enough about extension because I've done some of that myself too. But it's crucial.
Yeah, you mentioned that you've done some extension work. I still run into folks all the time who brag on your helping them, even though you were research teaching, you didn't have a formal extension role. You spent quite a bit of time doing that, didn't you?
Yeah, but it was over 5 years. The University of Georgia did not have a Forage Extension Specialist. And I tried to help, but I had my full-time job of teaching and research, but I tried to do as many meetings as I could, and I wrote a monthly column for the Georgia Cattlemen, and that was much appreciated. And I have to say that the cattlemen did respond very well to me.
Very much so.
I learned a lot.
It's rare when I do a cattleman's meeting that someone doesn't ask you about you. Either they've read your articles or many of them had you in class as a teacher. So, and speaking of classes, I'm curious, during your training, did you have a favorite class? What was your favorite class that you took as a student? And it may not be forage or ag related, and maybe it's something different.
At the University of Wisconsin, I had very poor advising from my soils advisor. Absolutely no humanities courses at all. Nothing, not even a history course. It was all in science, which was good. Chemistry and botany courses, they were fine. And I heard from a friend, several friends, advised me about a course in comparative literature that was phenomenal. A lady taught it, and it was on great books that have made civilization. So I thought, I'd like to take it. So I asked my advisor about it. He gave me a funny look, and he said, "Carl, what's that got to do with agriculture?" And I said, "Probably nothing." I said, "But I think I'd like to take it." I took it anyway. It was the best course I took at the University of Wisconsin because it caused me to be exposed to all kinds of cultures, and it caused me to question things and to start thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't learned that before.
Mm-hmm. Well, that served you well. That critical thinking served you well, especially as we'll get into some of the research and development work that you did. So while we're on that subject, what are some of your favorite activities outside of work, outside of school, and what are some things you're into beyond that?
I think I have several things. I've always been an avid reader of books, primarily biographies and history and this sort of ecology as well, and I still do. I love reading. And then music is another area of classical music, and of course I have zero ability there and had no training in it at all, but I've acquired that, and I love choral music, opera, symphonic music, and yes, and I do supported graduate students and fellowships in that area as well, because it has done great things for me, and that's all I can say is thank you.
I know you are known in Athens here as a great supporter of the arts, and particularly the School of Music. So take me back to when you first started at Auburn as a faculty member there, doing research and teaching. Tell me a little bit about how you approached that job. Were you ambitious? Were you kind of overwhelmed? Did you feel like you knew what you needed to do? Describe that process to me, because I know a lot of folks when they first start that job, sometimes they're a little bit overwhelmed with the.
I think no, I was not overwhelmed with it. I received excellent training at Florida, and this really helped me immensely to feel a good degree of confidence. And I also had some very good co-workers there, because back in those early days, they supported it with more faculty members in research there than they do today. And that helped me. These older men there were able to look out for me and encourage me, and that was just great. I learned a lot there. And of course, I got to travel around the state quite a bit in my research because of the branch stations. So I was exposed to different climatic zones, and that helped a lot in my thinking. And having had the same thing in Florida, it was very good.
So over the course of your career, you've had many impactful things that you have done, and there's a really long list, and I would leave something out if we start listing things. But if you were to think of one or two things that really you feel like you made the biggest contribution, biggest impact with, what would those one or two things be?
I think I'd have to choose the one where I picked up on this work that was reported from the university, from the ARS Georgia here, where the scientists had a pretty good indication that there was a fungal endophyte in tall fescue that was responsible for it. They hadn't proven it, of course, but it was very good circumstantial evidence of it. Well, I was at Auburn at that time, and I lucked out tremendously on a grazing experiment there that we put out to test tall fescue and against some other grasses there, and a replicated grazing trial. Well, it turned out that some of these paddocks that we had the animals performed very well on, and then there were others that they did not. And this, of course, puzzled us to no end. And then I learned of this work here at Georgia, at the ARS, of this possibility. So I found out how to test our grasses, and sure enough, there was a difference between infection with the endophyte and not. That ends, I said, well, how did we get that in the seed? Well, fortunately, the good record keeping of the superintendent of the station showed that he had planted old seed in some of the paddocks, which of course the fungus dies in the storage. And then the others were new seed that was used, Old Kentucky 31 tall fescue. And so in a sense, I lucked out there, but we had good evidence then, you see, that the fungus was responsible for the toxicity problem.
You know, some of the greatest occurrences in science have been that sort of serendipitous type of event. This was another example of that. So that was one of your biggest research contributions,
I think so.
And I think many would agree with that.
Yes.
And,
well, of the research, you're right.
Yeah, and you are, I hope this is not a secret, I think you all are talking about this, that you and Dr. Ball and Dr. Lacefield are writing another book about the history of understanding how tall fescue and the endophyte relationship evolved. What's the other piece of scholarship, or are there anything other than that research that you feel like you've made a big contribution to society as a whole?
That's a fairly easy thing to answer. I think one of the most significant things I ever contributed to in my career was one, and that is the writing together with Ball and Lacefield of a book, Southern Forages, which came out first in 1991 and is now in the 5th edition, much expanded, and it has continued to sell very well, used at over 60 universities and colleges in the country as a textbook. But more importantly, even greater sales to livestock owners, which I'm proud of that particularly. So yes, I think that's the one thing that we've done that has probably had the biggest impact overall, and it was a big help to extension specialists, I know.
So I'm curious, what was your favorite part of the job? You did teaching, you did research, you even did quite a bit of extension work. What was sort of the thing that you really enjoyed the most of what you did?
Early in my career, it was probably research. Later on, I think the teaching aspect was my great love, because in my later years, I was not as creative as earlier, I think. That was it, which is normal, I think. And for me, I love students. I just love students. And I think and I loved the little extension work I did too. That was a great love, because you start seeing research put to work, and that makes you feel good all over. And our book has done just that. I'm proud of it.
Well, you certainly have had a long and very successful career. I'm curious, if you were to look back on your career, is there anything that you'd like to do differently? Are you pleased with how everything came out, or everyone has a few regrets, I guess, but.
Oh yeah, I've done some stupid things and wasted efforts. Yeah. Everybody has, if they're honest about it.
Yeah. Well, sometimes those end up creating another avenue too. So.
Well, I think I'll just cite one of them, and that is the fact that with the endophyte in the tall fescue caused the toxicity syndrome. Well, it's easy to conclude. Let's just suppose now we can eliminate that fungus and have a variety without fungus in it. Solved, isn't it? Easy. Animals are going to perform splendidly. So we issued, when I was at Auburn, the first endophyte-free tall fescue called AU Triumph, in which we thought this is going to solve the whole thing. Wrong. Because what happened was farmers were planting it, and yes, the animals did well. But over several years, it was obvious that stands deteriorated very quickly under grazing. And that puzzled us. Why? Well, we did not know at that time that the endophyte had beneficial effects on the plant. And that, we had to learn that. And of course, in the meantime, that variety then collapsed as a useful thing. It's still, though you can use that in the northern area of the United States where they don't have the stresses we do here in the South. But for us down here, it's impossible.
Well, you and I have had this conversation, and I know you think it as being a failed release, but I also know that it created a whole set of experiments where we could look at that effect, and in many ways led to the development of novel endophyte tall fescues that do last, that do persist in our environment, and so it was definitely a stepping stone in that right direction.
Yeah, but initially it was very humbling. And that sometimes a little humility is useful. And I will have to say that when I got to work here and I was able to cooperate with Joe Boughton on the development of the novel endophyte, which I think is one of his great accomplishments, and that's absolutely phenomenal. And I must say this, that I personally believe that Joe Boughton is one of the greatest forage breeders in the United States.
I could not agree more. I think he's had a big impact for sure. So, switching gears a little bit on you, I want to talk, if you don't mind, about a little bit of personal stuff. You were blessed with two great wives. I know that they meant a lot to you. How did they support your career?
Good question. My first wife was a nurse, grew up on a small dairy farm, just like I did, in southwestern Wisconsin. She was a great inspiration to me in every way. Of course, she helped support me in graduate school too, which is a very wonderful thing. But overall, she was a strong support system all the way through. She knew I could be a success, no question about it. And that makes you feel pretty good. She didn't criticize, but she was a support system. My last wife, Pat, of course, by then I was highly successful, but she too was a strong supporter and believed I could do anything I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. She believed that. Mm-hmm. Maybe a little bit exaggerated, but yet it makes you feel good that a wife, and she was very intelligent. I want to say this, I think personally, both of those wives of mine were more intelligent than I was. Yeah. I no doubt about that. It doesn't bother me. Some men can't tolerate that. But yeah, I take it as a great tribute that they put up with me.
They suffered their lot, didn't they?
Both of them had one other great attribute, a great sense of humor. That's important.
Yeah, very much so. So, how do you feel that the balance? This job can really demand a lot of time, of course, and sometimes that gets your work and your life a little bit out of balance. When you reflect back on that, how do you feel about your work-life balance? I feel very good. Because I had such supportive wives, and no, I don't think we had a real problem there at all. Well, I think that's a tribute to their seeing your mission, your calling as well. So.
I will say this. Overall, throughout my life, I was not a person to bring work home at night with me. It rarely ever happened. And I think my home life was a home life. And I think that's something that we have to consider. I know that there are scientists, professors that give too much in their professional life. And the home life is starved. Well, we have fun together.
That's great.
And both wives were my best friends.
So, we've talked about your parents, your mother's influence, and your wife's influence, and your major professors, and who do you credit for your success?
Oh.
You need not be limited to one, by the way.
I think one thing that I did learn on the farm, and this of course was my father and my mother and the community of other dairy farmers around, I learned some important things. Yes, I learned how to work hard, that's right, but I learned personal responsibility. If I had a job to do, I was responsible, not somebody else, me. And that is something easy to learn. I also learned thrift and how to manage money early in life, something that is lacking with way too many people that cannot manage money. For instance, when I was a little boy, my father took me to the local bank and opened a bank account for me where I could take my piggy bank pennies and put them in there to my account to save money. I learned early in life how to live below your income. And that means you also save money. And that money is saved and invested before you start spending. If you do that, you have no money problems.
Yeah, completely agree. So, as I'm getting older, I'm getting more philosophical on life.
That's normal.
And so I often ponder, philosophical things, and one of the things that I have read is that one shouldn't look for meaning in their life, but should strive to lead a meaningful life, to live a meaningful life. And I'm curious that if that's something that kind of resonates with you, do you feel like you've lived a life of meaning? Do you think you've had an impact? What do you, as you reflect on your career, do you feel like you've contributed something really significant to a society?
I think in this sense, I would pose a religious statement. Jesus said there are two commandments: to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And that means giving of yourself. Whatever you do, and I think whether you're an agronomist or anything else, you are giving. And you're helping other people, sometimes in different ways. And that's what life is all about. That's why we're here, to give. Are you an extension? No question about it. You see it every day. And I think that's personally rewarding. That is what I see. In my life, I feel good. I'm content. If I die tomorrow, so be it. That's okay. Some people have never learned to give.
So just to wrap all of this up and it's always a challenge to wrap something like this up, but make it even more challenging by this. I want to ask you, if you were to use one word to describe your career, your impact, your life on this earth, what would that one word be?
The word is simple: love.
That's touching. That really is. And I can tell you, just in my friendship with you and seeing what you've done over the years, I see that as that's the word I would use to describe you, Carl. And I really appreciate our friendship. And I really appreciate you sitting down to do this interview. I really enjoyed it. It's always good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.